Joining me today is Dr. Mark A. Hicks, author of Learning Love. Mark is an author, speaker, ghostwriter, and relationship coach with expertise in mental health and family dynamics. Holding a Doctor of Ministry degree, a master's in mental health counseling, a master's of divinity, and a bachelor's in psychology, his educational background reflects his unwavering commitment to understanding the human psyche and guiding individuals toward healthy relationships and meaningful lives. Over the course of his professional life, Mark has ventured into various spheres, serving as a minister, therapist, international missionary, recovery program director, disaster response coordinator, and radio host. His radio broadcast was a self-help themed program that aired nationwide in the Czech Republic as he served there as a missionary. Mark's goal is to spread a message of love that is practical, tangible, and a realistic life for everyone, regardless of your relationship experience so far. In his book, Learning Love, he teaches the 5 components of love anyone can learn and practice to build healthy, happy, thriving relationships. I think it's important for the listeners to understand you aren't just someone with theories about how people relate to each other, but that you have a lot of both education and experience on the subject. Can you explain a little about your background in working with people to understand themselves and how they relate to others?
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a varied background. First of all, I came from a good family, and I'm very lucky in that regard. I know a lot of people don't. And I've worked with a lot of folks over the years that have come from toxic relationships, that have come from dysfunctional families. And I recognize how lucky I was to have parents that protected me, that loved me and my sister, and were good to us. And so I learned a lot about relationships from my family as a child. Then I have a master's degree in mental health counseling. I have worked as a professional counselor. I've studied a lot in the areas of psychology. And of course, that talks a lot about human relationships. In fact, almost everything in psychology at some point is going to bring us back around to how we connect with people. In addition to that, I have advanced degrees in the areas of religion and spirituality. And that was an area that I really focused on ancient wisdom. What has been taught by the ancient smart people, the people that were the gurus of their era? Because psychology didn't exist back then, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, but people were still in relationships. And so I've really looked over the years at what kind of wisdom there is that was taught by the spiritual teachers through the ages and what's been passed down to us that's not new, but is thousands of years old. But how does that relate to what we know from modern psychology? How does that relate to what we're learning in the science of human relationships? And so that's some of my personal and professional life. But one of the areas that I really learned about relationships was I learned things the hard way. When I was young, I did not know the things that I know now. And I got married, and it was a disaster. I had a terrible relationship. It was a toxic relationship in every way and ended in divorce. And I still have the emotional scars from that. And so a lot of the things that I have pursued since then have been trying to learn really what love is and how we live that out. Because I'm a good example to show that just because you come from a good family doesn't mean you know everything about love and relationships. Even if you have studied psychology, doesn't mean that you know everything about how to live that out. And so in recent years, many years now, I have dedicated myself to not only taking the lessons I learned as a child from my family, from psychology, from the ancient spiritual wisdom, but also applying those hard lessons that I learned in my own failed marriage. I'm now married again, and we are happy together. We have a wonderful relationship. I'm so blessed every day to have my wife with me in my life, and we have a great time together. And that's the difference that it can be when we learn what love is and how to live that out.
Yeah, I think in your book, one of the things that really came out, what was really clear was, the fact that while you got these degrees, et cetera, it was very practical. It was very hands-on. It seemed very clear that, you'd had a lot of experience actually working in this and helping people through. And you just had tons of great examples of, various things that you'd talked with people and talked them through.
Yeah, I did not want to write an academic book about love. I wanted to write a real life, practical uh, discussion about love and relationships and how to live that out in real life, not some lofty theory, but what we actually live every day.
So one of the first points in the book that really, just really hit me, seemed very eye-opening to me is, of course, relationships are extremely important, possibly the cornerstone of a happy life. But there's no classroom training in it. We don't get handed a manual for how to handle relationships. Um, and we typically learn these, as you explain in the book, you typically learn these from things like our parents and our family. Those are a lot of the early influences that we have in them. And obviously, these people who are very close to us early on may not have figured this out themselves, or they may be challenged in a way that prevents them from being extremely good or well educated in kind of the science of building a relationship. You explain that this is such a crucial life skill, but in a lot of ways, learning it, you're kind of explaining is somewhat left to chance.
It is. It's amazing in our society when love and relationships are so important, how we leave this up to basically to families. And as I said, I'm an example that even if you come from a good family, it's no guarantee you're really going to understand how to live this out in reality. And I was one of the lucky ones. Many people come from toxic and abusive backgrounds as children and have no good examples of love and relationships in their life. And yet we just kind of expect people will figure it out. And that's not possible. We imagine if we left other important, crucial things of life to that kind of chance to say, well, we know you have to have food to sustain your life. So you just need to figure that out based on what your family taught you. Well, if you come from an agricultural background, you might eat pretty well, but many people are not going to know how to raise their own food to a level of really supporting themselves. Or imagine if we said, your only option to fix your car is to depend on your own mechanical skill that you learned directly from your family. Again, some people might do okay. A lot of people are going to struggle. When we have basic needs of life, we don't leave it to chance. And yet, with love and relationships, we basically do. We just expect people to figure it out. And what's more, we've left even the language of love up to songwriters and poets that speak about love from the language of the heart. And that is important. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The heart and the emotions are a major part of love, of course, but it's not the whole story. That when we come from a world that is full of loneliness and dysfunction and toxic behavior and too often abuse, you need more than a song. You need tangible, practical, real life teaching on how to live out love and relationships in a real way. But the good news is love is a learned skill set. We don't have to leave it to chance. There is a skill set of love, and that's what I talk about in the book, is how to live it out in a practical way based on ancient wisdom, based on modern psychology. How do we live out love in a real, tangible, practical way? And so if someone has come from that dysfunctional family and is expected to just figure it out, I hope that they will find hope in my writing, because it is a learned skill set. You don't have to just wing it.
Yeah, I mean that's such an amazing point. Early on in the book, I think you kind of start talking about this, and the reader gets hit with it and thinks, "Wow, this seems so obvious, right? That this is so important. It's something that we really need to understand, and yet we probably have not." In any way scratched the surface of thinking through it, either intellectually or even understanding what our limitations for it might be. In addition to that, There's kind of something I would say is a bit analogous to this. You kind of talk a little bit about therapy just in general, and what really resonated with me was that we have experts for so many things in our lives. Everything, not so much when it comes to our mental health. We don't necessarily have that expert who is involved. Um, and you make the case that what's super important then for almost everyone, if not everyone, is the need for therapy. You discuss, I think, taking a car in for maintenance, or routine wellness checks for physical doctors, etc. These are all things that we would just take for granted. We would assume these are things that we have to do. But when it comes to something as important as our mental health, we don't have that kind of person, that expert who's helping guide us. This seems to be a really strong point in your book. It makes so much sense. How do people usually respond to that?
Yeah, it's been interesting. A lot of people agree with that immediately, but I've received probably more pushback on that point than any other area of the book. I do make the case that everyone should be in counseling of some type. Now, that doesn't mean everyone needs to see a therapist every week, but just like you would go to the doctor once a year, perhaps for a physical, or certainly go when you're sick, uh, you need to have a counselor, a therapist, a coach, someone in your life that you can go to when you need it, and someone that you can check in with when you're kind of struggling. And everyone needs that in their life. We have physical doctors, as you mentioned, we have mechanics, we have dentists that we just routinely see to stay healthy. Well, our mental health is just as important, and it is such a major part of how we function in the world, particularly in our relationships, how we connect with people is based on our mental and emotional state. And so, why would we not get help for that just as we do for our physical health? Some people push back on that. I've had several people that bring up the point, well, not everybody can afford therapy. And I get that. I totally understand that point. There are ways around that. I at one time was part of a free counseling clinic that was sponsored by a church and a nonprofit in the community where I lived at the time. And so free therapy was provided there for those that were absolutely unable to afford a therapist, even on a sliding scale. There are ways, but uh, even if someone cannot afford a therapist, I would say there's plenty of people that cannot afford a dentist. That does not negate the need for a dentist. And so, while it's a valid point that some people might not be able to afford it, and I am sensitive to that, I still make the case that it is needed, and that the fact that they can't afford it brings up a different societal problem. Life is just too complicated today. It's not what it once was. Life, whether it's better or worse, I'm not trying to argue, not trying to make that point. But at one time, life was simpler, and I'll give a simple example of that. In 1943, in the home in a family, who was it that cooked dinner? Well, of course, it was the wife, and the husband was probably going to be home at the same time every day from his job, and the family, the American family gathered around the dinner table. That's just the way it was, and it wasn't a question of who's cooking dinner. Now, in this very complicated world, anyone in the family, some of the older children, the husband, wife, anybody might cook dinner, or you might go out to eat, or you might just grab something on the way to soccer practice. It's much more complicated, and that's just one very simplistic example. Life is very complicated today, and just as we need professionals to help us with our vehicle, with our physical health, we need professionals in our life to help us with our mental health, and that makes such a huge difference in our relationships.
You kind of do make these other examples to like routine maintenance of various types.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you've seen in your years of working with people. What are common things that someone just in general, people as they're going through time, they're going to maybe develop unhealthy coping mechanisms, etc. What are common things that people who would come into therapy would need as some kind of, if you want to refer to it almost as routine maintenance, what would be a common thing that would help someone?
Yeah, life just gets stressful, and learning to have those coping skills to deal with stress. Everyone feels stress in their life. It is just part of our modern society, and so learning how to deal with that in a healthy way is absolutely crucial. One of the things we hear a lot about, but that we aren't necessarily good at, are things like self-care. That's kind of trendy now to use that term and to talk about self-care, but most people aren't very good at it. And learning how to make that a priority, to take care of yourself and know that your own health is going to it's going to make a huge difference in how you take care of others. One of the things we do is we get so caught up in our jobs and our family life and all the busyness of life that we just forget to take care of ourselves, and we get absolutely run down. And one of the things that makes a huge difference when you're sort of checking in with a counselor, a therapist, coach, someone in your life that's paying attention to these things, of just sort of resetting. How am I taking care of myself so that I can take care of other people, so that I can be there in my relationships? Those little maintenance things make a huge difference, even if you're not dealing with some overwhelming psychological need at the time, or life tragedy or something like that. Life, just a normal everyday life, is just stressful. And learning how to cope with that and checking in to see how well we're coping with that makes a huge difference.
Do you think that people have more trouble understanding what they need to do to take care of themselves? Or do you think that people more often don't realize that they're going through these kind of situations and maybe aren't coping with them? Because I could imagine a lot of people think, oh, I'm fine. And it may even be difficult to get them to see the fact that they're going through a lot of stress.
Oh, absolutely. We're so inundated with it, we don't even notice it anymore. We just think that's just life, and we get accustomed to it, and we don't realize this the wear and tear that it takes on us. Another simple example: how many times do people stop and take a deep breath? It's very rare for a lot of people. They're just we just get into this routine where we're just going all the time, and we don't even stop long enough to take one single deep breath during the day. But yet, science teaches us that taking deep breaths is actually extraordinarily healthy for us. And we don't even take the time to do something that simple. Uh, so I think a lot of folks just get into the routine, they get into the rush. It becomes what looks like normal life. And since everyone around them is doing that as well, it's really hard to see that we're getting worn down, and that maybe we're not connecting in our relationships as we were. And just having someone to help us pay attention to that, as I said, is make a huge difference.
So in the book, the real meat of the book, the focus of it is these five components of love and why each is important. I think each was explained really well. They seemed maybe not logical to me at first, but after you explain them and you explain the reasoning behind them, they all really made a lot of sense, and they were, very, very clear. I want to talk about grief, though, most of all, because that one had me scratching my head at first, like, how is this a part of love? But in your explanation, obviously, it becomes really clear. Your treatment of grief, your description of it, the explanation, everything around that was probably the most balanced and realistic I've ever heard. My dad passed away 5 years ago, and I can tell my mom still bristles whenever anyone suggests that you can be just okay or fine after someone really close to you passes. But I think she would totally appreciate your discussion of this. Can you describe a little bit your explanation of how grief leaves you changed, but that you're still able to go on?
Absolutely. It's so crucial. As you said, I teach the five components of love. Anyone can practice these five components to live out healthy, happy relationships. And a lot of people are surprised to see that the first component of love is grief. When we talk about love, everyone automatically expects that we're going to be talking about, butterflies and things that are beautiful. And yes, that's part of it. But when we talk to people who have put up emotional walls that are keeping people at arm's length, that are living with bitterness, that are pushing people away, even people that they love, that have these emotional barriers in their life, they will always go back to a point of tragedy, a point of trauma, a place where they lost something or someone that was beautiful in their life, that was important to them. And if we don't know how to grieve, it's so easy to start putting up these barriers to try to keep from getting hurt again, to try to make sure we protect ourselves from the heartbreaks of life. And in doing that, we end up pushing people out of our life that we love. We end up distancing ourselves from the very relationships that we want in life because we're afraid of getting hurt again. We're not going to get through this life without scars. Everyone is going to experience some kind of heartache and hardship over the course of their life. And some of it's going to hurt really bad. We're going to experience terrible trauma at times, and we're going to lose people that we love. And that's going to leave emotional scars. It's going to affect our heart. It's going to break our heart, and it's going to feel like we have a hole in our heart. But what I want people to understand is that grief is a healer. And yes, you may always have that hole in your heart, but you can live a really good life with a hole in your heart. And that's the goal. I think your mom's right. We shouldn't say, oh, it'll be okay. It's not okay. She lost someone that she truly loved in this life and will always love, and it will always leave a hole in her heart. But she can live a really good life with a hole in her heart. And that's what I want people to know, that you don't have to put up barriers, push people away, try to protect yourself, hide behind walls, these emotional walls that we put up. We can grieve, and that's our comeback story. That's the foundation that we know that even though we're going to have emotional scars from the hardships of life, even though things may leave a hole in our heart, we can still live that good life with a hole in our heart. We can still have love and relationships and connections. And yeah, it's never going to be okay that those bad things happen, but life can still be good again. And we can still have life and love and enjoyment and live life to the fullest, even though we're always going to carry those scars.
Yeah, I think this was, really exceptional standout part of the book. Like, I feel like so often, if you read anything that has to do with therapy, et cetera, they don't, I think, admit that, fact that things are still going to be hard. You're still going to feel the way you do. Your life is never going to be the way it was before. And I thought this
Right.
very direct feedback was just amazing.
Well, one of the things that I try to remind people, imagine, put it on a physical level. Imagine someone lost an arm in an industrial accident. Life will never be the same. And it will never be okay that that happened. And yet, we see lots of people that go on after an accident like that to live wonderful lives, fulfilling lives, active lives. But it takes learning new skills. It takes a matter of healing. It takes therapy, in this case, physical therapy. It takes doctors. It takes professionals, maybe learning how to use a prosthesis. A number of things are involved, but you can live a wonderful life even without that arm. And that's what I want people to know about emotional injuries as well. That yes, you'll have a hole in your heart, but you can live a really good life with a hole in your heart. And if you get the therapy that you need, you get the help that you need, and you go through the process of grief, you can live that great life anyway.
You talked a bit too here about, that people are, push others away sometimes out of their issues, the challenges that they've had, the bad experiences that they've had in the past. We could probably have an entire episode too talking specifically about this, but I feel like, that's something that we see a lot. Like I'll see a lot of people, I would say in general, that are extremely hard workers. The people who are, you'd maybe label as overachievers, but as you get to know them, sometimes it just seems like their need to work is really driven by not so much a need to work, but maybe to escape something else. Would you say you see a lot in therapy that if someone is trying to push someone else away, is busyness, and obviously this can happen for so many reasons, but is busyness sometimes a way to avoid having to deal with the mental issues that somebody may be struggling with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great way of hiding. If we can just fill our time, our minds, our calendars with all kinds of activity, we can hide from the truth. And we can act as if we are achieving a lot of things, and we might be. But the question is, are they really the things you want to achieve? Are they fulfilling? And that's the question. Some people are busy and some people are not, and it's not good or bad either way. But if the question is, are you achieving the fulfillment that you're looking for in life? And many times when we just don't think we have that, or we're afraid of being hurt, we're not wanting to deal with our emotional struggles of some kind, yeah, we just stay busy. In the example of our relationships, how many married couples, rather than dealing with the struggles they may be having, just stay at work longer, or just find a way to put their life into the kids and be involved in all the family activities and not really address the distance between them. So many folks, when their last child goes off to college, look at a stranger that they live with in that house because they've stayed so busy they haven't really addressed the issues with them. And that's so important to have that practical understanding. And practicality is the actually the third component of love, of having that practical understanding of course we live busy lives, but are we living fulfilled lives in that busyness? And are we staying busy to avoid the things that we really need to address that would help us live that fulfilled life if we found some healing?
Yeah, so one of the other things I thought as I was reading through this book is, most people when they're in relationships, there's somebody, right? One person in the couple who is maybe more sociable than the other. One is maybe more nurturing, one is better at money, etc. You describe how everyone needs to be practicing all five of the aspects of love. But, one of the things I would imagine is happening sometimes is that people are kind of thinking that their partner is going to be picking up the slack and kind of working on that part of their relationship. And maybe that's all right. Maybe it's okay that just one person is really focused on it and the other person maybe less so. Can you talk a little bit about how something like that would work or not work?
Yeah, I think it's crucial that everyone practice all five of the components of love, but some of them are going to come natural and some are not. Some are always going to be a little awkward. For instance, the second component of love is emotion. That's one of the more obvious ones. And some people, emotion comes very naturally. It's easy. They express themselves to those they love without any hindrance at all. They don't have any trouble saying "I love you." They don't have any trouble showing their emotions and how much they care for people. And yet, there's other folks that are more comfortable with the third component of love, which is practicality. They're more cerebral. They want to make sure everything is logical. Now, those two people can be in love with one another, but both need to be practicing what the other is good at. Now, it doesn't mean that you're ever going to become as good as your partner, but the more cerebral person still needs to learn to say, I love you. I appreciate you. It may not flow as naturally, but the people that you love need to hear that from you. They need to know that when they do kind things for you, that you appreciate it. Saying just simple things like saying thank you, I appreciate that, is just it goes a long way in relationships to show just a little bit of genuine emotion, even if you're not an emotional person. And in the same way, if you're a very emotional person and you sort of fly by the seat of your pants sometimes because you just kind of go with your gut, there's still practical aspects of life that need to be addressed. Communication skills is a practical skill set that needs to be learned in relationships. Now, that may not come as natural to someone who just sort of flies with whatever they're feeling at the time, but they need to practice it. And so I really emphasize that word practice. It may not come natural. You might not ever be as good at it as someone in your life, but practice all five components of love. And when we do that, we'll get better because it's like any other skill set. You practice it, you get better. But when you have people in your life that are exceptionally good at a certain component of love, sure, follow their lead. That'd be great.
So let's drill into the emotional piece of it a little bit. So one of the questions I have as I was reading through this and thinking about it was, you know, people on the emotional side, one of the things that they can do is they can demonstrate it, right? There's just that part that then becomes obvious to other people. But I think part of it too is being connected to it themselves, like actually feeling the emotions, being
Mhm.
comfortable with that. Are both of those important? Like actually kind of getting in touch with the feeling that you have, or is it the demonstration of it that's more important? Is it both? What do you think?
I think it's both. And I think when you genuinely feel something and you would allow that to come out, then there's going to be a demonstration naturally and organically. And I think that's the idea that if that emotion isn't something that we necessarily need to fake. Now, again, there are some people that need to practice it because it doesn't come as natural to them. But when you're an emotional person and you have those genuine feelings of emotion for someone, let that come out organically. And and it's important to let that happen, to not just keep those feelings inside and assume everyone knows it because you feel it. Let that come out in demonstrations of how you appreciate those that you love. Let that genuine emotion come through. If you're an emotional person, that might be in big ways. If you're not an emotional person, it may be in very small ways. But what you're feeling needs to come through. Now that can be very vulnerable for some people. That can be that sense of vulnerability. Like, what if that doesn't, they don't respond the way I hope, and that sort of thing. And that's okay. You know, it's all right to feel a little vulnerable in relationships because the fact is, we're not going to be able to protect ourselves all the time. That relationships are vulnerable. And that's why we do have these other balancing things like practicality. How do we take care of ourselves and each other in these relationships? But it's okay to feel a little vulnerable. Don't be too scared of that. That can be one of the great things about it, that we can let go and let our genuine feelings come out in those demonstrations of love.
So I just have to say this is an absolutely beautiful book. I have already felt since having read it, just my focus being different. I've thought more about my personal relationships, my day-to-day focus, and what it is that I'm thinking about. Obviously, you talk a lot about then building these meaningful relationships with people, and the suggestions that you have throughout are amazing. I feel like it's very clear. It was easy to read. The things that you're suggesting are very actionable. But one of the things that I think people in general struggle with is, the challenges that face them day to day with practicing love.
Yeah.
It isn't just, time pressures or busyness that stop people, although those certainly do. But it's also obviously the fear and insecurities that people have that have gotten them to this point. So, being able to prioritize relationships and in the other, pieces that are related to it. Um, Reading a book like this, I think, helps people to refocus, reprioritize, maybe the way I feel like I have in the last couple of weeks. But what are other things that you could suggest to people that would help them keep this thought of building relationships and practicing love, like in the front of their minds as they're going through their day to day life?
One of the things that I think really keeps things in front of to keep us focused on relationships is keep the passion in life. And when we use the word passion, very often we think about things like sexual intimacy in relationships, and that's part of it certainly. But that's not the whole story. The We're really talking about a passion for life. And so often, life, because of the fears, as you mentioned, as the struggles of life, the busyness of life, for so many different reasons, life can just drag us down. It can become routine, and we can forget about enjoying life. Passion is the wind in our sails. It's the fuel in our engine, and passion is the fifth component of love. It is so important to practice our passion for life, of remembering to enjoy life, remembering to have fun. Now, everything's not going to fall into that category. Some things are very serious, and that's why we have practicality as the third component of love. And some things are tragic, and that's why we have grief as the first component of love. But let's not forget that life can be fun, and that should be a priority. We should try to enjoy our life because if you can go through your day and find reasons to laugh. Find reasons to enjoy your coworkers. Find reasons to enjoy what you do for a living. Every job's going to be a grind sometimes. It's not going to be fun all the time, obviously, but uh, there are things that we can enjoy in our day. And if we live that life in passion, that we just enjoy life, we remember to have fun, you're going to be in a lot better state when you do go home to your family, when you interact with your kids, with your spouse, with your partner, with your friends. You're going to be in a better state of mind if we live life from a passionate standpoint. If we can practice fun, if we can just enjoy life as much as possible. And again, I recognize there's a lot of limits to that, but don't forget to practice having fun, keeping the passion in life. And that's going to create a surge, like I say, the wind in your sails in those relationships. So it doesn't just fall into doldrums, into routine, and just get drugged down into the normalcy of life. Always remember that part of love and relationships and even life is about finding your passion every day, and finding the things that you enjoy that can make life fun.
So this has been Dr. Mark A. Hicks, and his book is called Learning Love. Absolutely amazing read. I'd highly recommend it. Mark, thanks so much for being on Things I've Learned.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.